Yeah, okay. First of all, I'm here to talk about the NHS and the campaign to defend the NHS. First of all, I'd say obviously the NHS we know is actually under attack from the right, from the Tories, but actually I have to say at the beginning as well, it's actually, I don't know if you saw recently, a month or so ago, the Observer ran a really long article by this Liberal writer, and this book he's published is actually a bestseller in the Guardian list, and it's really cynical, it's the only way the Guardian can be. View about the NHS that really people's attachment to the NHS is sentimental and means that we overlook the flaws and problems of the NHS. And I think people's attachment to the NHS, the first off is to state where it comes from. It isn't sentimental at all, it's actually perfectly rational, because what we have, and I think the unique feature of the NHS, which makes it different from all the other health reforms that happen across Europe, all the other kind of various social democratic governments, is the NHS wasn't based on individual insurance, it's based on general taxation, it's based on social solidarity and pooled risk. Those are the things that bind it together. Those are the things that made it effective as well, and obviously those are the things that made it to neoliberals of all stripes, from the Tories to cynical liberals. Now, it's also not sentimental because objectively the facts are that the NHS has been described by the OECD, which looks at these things purely objectively economic terms, that the NHS is the fairest, most cost effective, or one of the fairest, most cost effective and efficient healthcare systems in the world. For example, compared to the States, per capita, the NHS costs less than half of US health spending. And US health spending is not universal. That means there are millions of people that don't have access to that healthcare system. And if you look at the outcomes, this really expensive American healthcare system delivers poor outcomes in that American men die, even American middle class men actually die before British working class men. Infant mortality rate in the States is higher than in this country, and in some cases, like for example Washington, 4 or 5 years ago, infant mortality rate among poor black kids was the same as Bangladesh, which is absolutely shameful, disgraceful. But an indication of this is what marketised healthcare looks like. Now, the NHS is facing a two-pronged attack. The first attack is on the budget. Although the Tories claim that they're going to protect the NHS budget, in fact, they're taking £20 billion out of the NHS budget over the lifetime of this government. And this is why we can see in London alone a whole wave of 9 A&Es threatening closure, maternity wards threatening closure, thousands of beds being lost, even though that's going to happen, in spite of the fact actually there's a rising demand for these services across London. And for example, Lewisham, which is threatening closure, it's reckoned that 80 seriously ill patients a day are going to have to, if Lewisham closes, have to go find somewhere else, either in London or even outside London, to get treatment. And so literally people are going to die because of these cuts alone. Now the second attack is and I'm still meeting people that are quite well read that don't know what's happening, what changed in April this year, what changed the NHS, the Health and Social Care Act, what the implications are. Well, the first thing the Health and Social Care Act did was actually to effectively abolish the NHS as a universal healthcare system. Germany no longer has a legal responsibility to provide universal healthcare in England. It does in Wales and Scotland, but not in England. Yeah? That was a legal right, that was a legal obligation that goes back to 1948, and that's been abolished. Effectively, care has been, the day-to-day management has been handed to a quanga called NHS England, run by a guy who's actually never even used the NHS. He's a New Zealand or Australian BUPA member. And that's what's happening at national level, and at a local level, clinical commissioning groups made up of local doctors are going to be deciding allocation of healthcare. Now, they're going to have the powers to decide what services are provided on the NHS and what not. Already they've started to cut out certain treatments and say they no longer provide the NHS. They can bring in charges for services without limit. Yeah? And of course, The superficial idea is, well, we can trust these doctors, but actually, essentially, as we see as this process goes, doctors won't be making these decisions. Already, they're going to actually, these decision-making processes are going to be delegated first of all to bureaucrats and then actually to private companies. But we can already in West London, United Healthcare, the American healthcare company, are effectively determining what healthcare people can access in West London. The other thing that's happened is that all healthcare providers, that means hospitals like Wicks Cross, are all going to become part of trusts. So they're independent, competing units. They can borrow money, but they can also go bankrupt. Yeah? And the other thing that is really scary is actually that up until last year, there was a 3% cap on how many private patients they could treat. Now that cap has been raised to 49%. They didn't want to say 50%. But it's 49%. And what you can see is there'll be some hospitals, like you can imagine, actually Barts for cancer treatments, Great Ormond Street. They will be international destinations for the rich to come and get their healthcare. And these hospitals will be forced to compete for that kind of business. And where are we going to come in our ration healthcare? We're going to come way, way down. Okay, so I think those are the main things that are happening now. That's what's happened since April. And obviously it's going to take a while. Obviously the other thing is as well, the last year's argument was, the Liberals and people in the coalition government argued, well, this isn't going to force privatisation, there's been no pressure to privatisation, but actually if you read the recent amendments that were made to the Act, that really CCGs will be forced to, actually because they're frightened of being sued by private companies, they will be forced to put every contract out when it comes up for renewal out to tender, competitive tender, where you've got companies like Virgin, like Serco, who've got the resources, they've got the lawyers to produce glossy pamphlets to undercut the price, to start moving in, cherry-picking the services that they want to make a profit out of. Okay, now, there has actually been quite unprecedented opposition to this bill when it was going through Parliament, which is quite rare. All professional organisations opposed it. When 38 Degrees launched petitions, hundreds of thousands of people signed petitions. But the problem is it didn't make much impact, particularly because if you watch the BBC or whatever, they hardly ever reported any opposition, only reluctantly reported opposition. But that in itself didn't explain why the bill had such an easy ride. And in order to understand that, you have to understand the role of the Labour Party and the unions. Because the problem that the Labour Party had is that this process of preparing for the market, introducing a market, started under Alan Milburn. Yeah? Maintaining and developing the market, using PFI, the private finance, to build these hospitals that are causing enormous debts, creating independent treatment centres. So now actually many people will be referred by local doctors for their hip replacement to a unit with an NHS logo on it. It's actually a private company. This all started under Labour. And also, I think what Alison Pollock described was the process which the privateers had to recognise. They had to change the whole culture in the NHS from top to bottom. Because actually, going back 20, 30 years ago, everybody from the top civil service was committed to a public service culture. So they started under Labour, bringing in people, seconding people from McKinsey's into the Department of Health, and people going the other way around. And there's a couple of things to say, because at the time, Alison Pollock wrote a book that people should read called NHS PLC in 2005, and she's describing the process that was starting there. At the time, Alan Milburn from Labour dismissed her as a second-rate academic. So I'd have to tell you, where is Alan Milburn now? Where's he gone to? He's become an advisor to Ridgepoint Capital, a venture capital firm which is buying up health companies all over the place. And just to balance it out, he's involved in fizzy drinks as well. Patricia Hewitt, whose successor in the health sector, has been paid at least £60,000 for advising private healthcare companies. Simon Stevens, who's Blair's special advisor on health, he's now executive vice president of United Health, one of America's largest private health companies. And this is a really very interesting one, because he gave the game away. Mark Britnell is an example, a career civil servant in the NHS. who left in 2009 to become Global Head of Health for the consultants KPMG. And he gave an interview for a brochure for Apex Partners, a private equity firm that organised a conference in New York a couple of years ago on how private companies could take advantage of what the changes in the healthcare system in this country. In future, he said, Britnell said, the NHS will be a state insurance provider, not a state deliverer. The NHS will be shown no mercy, and the best time to take advantage of this will be in the next couple of years. So that's what the period we're in today. Yeah? Okay. But what I really want to, because actually, the NHS is unique actually because it came about, I think it wasn't just because we had a forming Labour government. Actually, it was because of massive pressure from below. You know, where I haven't got much time to go into it. My view is massive pressure from below that created the pressure on government to provide this kind of unique service based on similar experiences happening in mining villages in Wales. You know, basically socialist GPs created the model of the RNHS, the idea, you know, that it was based on taxation and everything, social solidarity. Now, in spite of the lack of opposition from above, we can see when the NHS is under attack, we get a fantastic response from ordinary people. Lewisham Hospital, 20,000 people marched to save Lewisham Hospital, and there's a fantastic campaign that is still ongoing. The local football team, I can't remember the football, but they even changed the day of their match so that people would go on the march. But even more interestingly, Stafford, where, you know, actually after months of attacks on Stafford and the quality of care in that hospital because of the way some patients were treated, Stafford Hospital was threatened with closure. 30,000 people in a very small community turned out on a rainy Saturday to defend that hospital because they know if the problem's in the hospital, we can fix them, but if I have to take my kid 12 miles to the nearest casualty, you know, that's the biggest risk. And that shows you what people will do to defend the NHS. And I'll just talk just a couple of things about what we're doing locally and in London, because what we're trying to do, I think what health campaigners, all the way along, we've been trying to generate opposition. You know, we've organised demonstrations that haven't been reported. But what we've done since January is actually, we've been arguing that all the different hospital campaigns should come together and actually form a single campaign, that we shouldn't allow them to play one hospital off against another. That joint campaign called for demonstration in London to defend London's NHS, and we got the support. And our argument is that this is not just a special interest for health workers and patients, but post workers. The CWU gave us £5 million, PCS, NUT. We got support at the local level from all those unions, yeah? And we got a march of 7,000 people. Now, the point of that march is to say, if we can do that, if the TUC calls something and the Labour Party calls something, what can they deliver? And obviously, that's the kind of pressure we want to put on. And already now, United are heavily involved in that march now, and they're actually proposing that there's a national demonstration to defend the NHS outside the Tory conference in Manchester in September, and we're hoping that that would be huge. But obviously the point of that is, you know, we've got to be clear about it. You know, what we need to do is create the confidence at all kinds of levels for health workers and communities to be able to defend our hospitals. There's a fantastic campaign going on now in Lewisham with the People's Commission. And what I would say, you know, for example, if one hospital like Lewisham, if the doctors and nurses and patients said, we are not going to let this hospital close, it would actually provide an inspiration. I think it would actually set a tone that we could actually defend the NHS. Oh, I've got time there. Okay. When I come back, actually, we've got local attacks on the NHS locally, and I'll just talk about that when I come back. But the whole thing about, I think, the NHS campaign is not, to me, it isn't. I'm not arguing that we have to raise it above other campaigns, but I think it is a campaign that we can all get behind, because if we can win it, actually it will be a generalised win for all of us. All the other campaigns, all the other attacks,